Hello everyone, welcome to my course lesson. In this video we are going to learn how to iterate through objects, properties and values. So let's start. Now the first method we are going to look at is the Object.entries static method. Now this method returns an array of a given object's own enumerable string key property key value pairs. Let's see how it works. Now let's say we have an object user with properties name and age. Then what again? Status active, email, so what property again, password and all that. Now we'll call the static method Object.entries on this object. So we do so like this. The the entries method is a static method, so just write Object.entries, then pass the object user. So we'll get the result in this variable entries. Now these entries will contain an array. Then now in the array, that array is a multi-dimensional array, and in that array it will have elements. Each element is also an array. Then inside the elements now, it will contain this property and this value. The second element will contain an array of this property and this value. So now let's log it and see how it looks like. Now we'll come here and say node test. So you see it, multi-dimensional array, one dimensional array to be precise. So you see that the first element in this array is also an array, like I said before. Now inside this array, it now contains element which is the property and the value of that property. Like now you see the user. Now you see here the property and the value of that property is contained in the first array. So now the elements of this array are the property, the first property, and its value. Now also the second element, the second array or the second element in this parent array is an array which contains the second property age and its value 30, and so on. You see the third array, it contains status and active. See it here. Also the fourth and the fifth, email and the value of the email, the property password and its value password. So you see, so that's the work of the entries static method. So you can see it in VS Code too. It returns an array of key values of the enumerable properties of an object. So now, as we have gotten these arrays, this array now in these entries, now we can then now loop through it using the for each method and then do with it whatever we want. So we have now successfully iterated over this object user using the Object.entries. Then when we get entries, we will just loop over it using the for each and then log it like this. Just we can do with it now whatever we want in our application. But the main issue here is that we have successfully iterated over the user object using Object.entries. So you see we have iterated over it and we can get the key and the value, and we can use it to do whatever we want in our application. Now also in Object.entries, remember it said it returns an array of the enumerable properties of an object. So in an object, there's what we call property descriptor. Now the descriptor adds properties or method, we can call it metadata or hidden properties, to each member of a property. So these properties are enumerable value, which is the actual value of the property. In this case of name, it is now this string. In the case of age, it is 30. In the case of status, it is active. Now enumerable Then we have writable. Now, enumerable is the property descriptor that tells JavaScript if this property can be listed or can be returned as a member of an object. Value, value is the value of the property. Writable means, can this property's value be changed? So if it can be changed, this writable becomes true. But if it cannot be changed, it becomes false. So as with the enumerable, like we said, the enumerable sets if a property can be listed as being the owner or being a member of an object. If it is false, then the property cannot be listed as a member of an object. If it is true, then it can be listed. So you see now, Object.entries only lists properties that are enumerable. That means it lists properties that its property descriptor enumerable is true. If it is false, it will not be listed here at all. So now let's see how we can set a property descriptor of an object. Now to do that, we'll use object. Now we use this defined property to set property and value to an object. So you see it takes the object, takes the property key, and take the attributes. You see the attributes is a property descriptor, so it's an instance. So you can see it as a property to an object or modifies attributes of an existing property. So now let's say now we'll now set. So now let's say we want to change the value of age and make it non-enumerable. So look at what we are going to do. Let's make it, then no, it should be value, not age. To be value. Wait, let's check it again. Okay, property and the property name. Sorry, we now have to add the property name, which is age. Yes, as the third argument. Then the fourth argument is not the property descriptor. Can set the value 30, or we can even change the value here 90. Let's even change the value here. Let's bring it up here so that it can be defined before this object.entry sees it. Now let's comment this out and then clear this and run. So you see it, we change the value to 90. So we can now set the enumerable to false. So when we set the enumerable to false, Object.entries cannot list this age because it's enumerable, it's false. So now let's see it. So you see we cannot see it here. The previous one it was there, but after that we can no longer see it. So it's gone because Object.entries only lists enumerable properties, and we made age an enumerable property. So that's why it's no longer listed in the entries. Now, another method we can use to iterate over an object is the Object.keys method. Now, an Object.keys method returns the keys of an object in an array. So it will just pick this, and return them in an array. So let's see how it works. Const keys object.keys, then we'll now pass the object. So now these keys will be an array that contain all the properties here in it. So first let's see how it looks like. We'll say keys. Now let's clear and run. Sorry, let me remove this. So you see the array contains all the keys in the object: name, age, status, email, password. The same thing here. So that's it. Now with these keys, now to iterate now over this, we know that this keys now is an object. So we cannot iterate over it using for each or the standard for statement. But now let's use for each. and get each key. Remember that this will be the each key: name, age, status, email, password in this keys array. So, and now to reference the value now, we will now use this object and use bracket notation to now get the value of each values here. So look at how we are going to do it. We'll now say calls, so now write value and now say user using bracket notation. We'll now pass in key. So what we did there is that we used the bracket notation to get the value of the key from the object. So this is a bracket notation. So we know that this key is a string that contains any of these property names. So as we can reference the value using the property names like this, the bracket notation like this, it will give us the value, which is 30. So this is actually what we are doing here. Now, because we know that this key is any of these properties in the user object, so that's why we are now using the bracket notation to retrieve the value of the key. Now the value of the key will now be stored in this value variable, and then now we'll display it. So now let's run it. You see now we have gotten all the values in the object. Yeah. So, and also inside here we can also use both the key and the value. So you see, you can both access both the key, that means the property, and also the value of it. So you see that we have successfully looked through this value, this user object, and gotten its key and value at the same time during the loop. Also, we can use the standard for loop to loop through these keys and also get the values from it. Now let's see how it's done. First, let's comment this out and then write our for loop. Now here, okay, so this is just a generation from VS Code. Now let's modify it to what we want. So here the keys is an array, so we'll put the keys here. Now use it to get each key. So now this will be a key. So we have gotten our key here. Now we'll now get the value. Now say user key using the bracket notation. Now we can now log it. Can now say key, then the value. So you see also, boom, we got it. So you can see we can use the Object.keys to loop through a user objects and properties. Then we can now use any of the looping method, the for each or the standard for loop, to now get the key and the value in each of the object's property. So we can now get all of them and log it and then use it in our application, whatever we want to do with it. Now another method we can use is the Object.values static method. Now this Object.values static method returns all the values in an object, like it will return this active, email, password in an array. So it's kind of the reverse of what keys does. Not actually the reverse, but yeah, object.keys gets the keys or the property names from an object, but Object.values get the values from an object. So now how do we use it? To come here and just pass values. No, sorry, not value. Yes, the values. So you see it returns an array of values of enumerable properties. So it returns the values of enumerable properties. Then let's now modify our previous key code to use the values. So here we now say values. Now here is value. So it will just log the value here. Now let's see it first. Let's clear our console. So you see it gets all the values and logs them. get all the values. Chidume Namdi, 30 active, email, the password 123456. So all of them are logged. So you can let's log the value so that you can see that it is in an array. So you see it's in an array, and we can now use the for each method now to look through the array and then now log the values there. So you see object.values just returns enumerable properties. So like we said in the first method that we looked at, the object.entries, object.values also returns only enumerable properties, even object.keys. So these three methods we looked at only returns enumerable properties. And like we have discussed, enumerable properties are properties in which the enumerable property descriptor of them are set to true. If it is set to false, then the property will not be listed at all. So now let's set a property, or let's modify a property name in this our object and modify its enumerable to false. You'll see that this value Chidume Namdi will not be listed in this value of array. So now let's see how we can do it. We can use define property, then we'll pass the name of the object, then the string of the property name we want to modify, then the property descriptor follows. We will now say enumerable, we'll just pass it false. Now you see that this value will no longer be there. So you see it's no longer there. Instead, it started from 30 active, email, and 13456. So you see object.values only returns enumerable properties. You can see it's enumerable properties. So enumerable is false. So the name property is not listed. So if we make age to be non-enumerable, so you will see that age 30 will no longer be here, but instead this will be added because we have changed the name from name to age. So age will no longer be there. 30 will no longer be listed. So now we can run it and see. So you see age is not 30 is no longer there, the age is no longer there because each enumerable has been set to false. But if we set it to true, so it will be listed. So by default, whenever you create an object, each enumerable is set to true by default. So we can now use this object to define static property to now modify its property descriptor on our own. So that's just what we did here. So this is just what we need to remember whenever we are trying to look through an object. Make sure that all of the objects that their enumerable property descriptor are all set to true. If not, anyone set to false, they will not be listed. Another way we can use to iterate over object values and properties is by using a static method in JavaScript called getOwnPropertyNames. Now let's look at what it does. First, let's clear everything here. So can I say object? So the getOwnPropertyNames is a static property defined in the object class. So we can now call getOwnPropertyNames. Then and now pass the object to Iterate. So we can now get the property names like this. So now let's look at the definition. You see that it returns the names of the own properties of an object. Now the own properties of an object are those that are defined directly on that object and are not inherited from the object's prototype. The properties of an object include both fields and functions. So it will return the property names in an array string just like keys does. So now let's log these property names and see what's inside it. Console.log property names. Now let's clear the console and run it. So you see it contains every name, every property names, name, age, status, email, and password. And then we can look through it using the for each method. Can also say property names dot for each. Then inside it just declare a property name that will hold each item in the property names. Then now you can now access the value inside it. Now saying user using the bracket notation, then passing the property name. Yes. So then we can then now log it. Property name and then the value. So you see, we got the property names, the keys, and then the values. So you see, get own property names is also another method we can use to get the keys of an object in an array, then loop through it and also reference the key, the property key, and also its value. So you see, it works also. Now, the difference between this key, get own property names, and other methods that we have seen like keys, values, and entries is that this get own property names also returns all property names regardless whether it's enumerable or non-enumerable. So if we set a property here to be non-enumerable, get own property names will still list it. Now let's see it in action. Let's make age non-enumerable. Let's use define property because we want to define only one. Then make age, then we add the property descriptor object, then use the property enumerable, make it false. So with this, now we have made the age property inside the user object to be non-enumerable, so not to be listed whenever using this user object. Now, but this get old property names will still list it, so it doesn't segregate whether you are enumerable or not, it will still list it. So now let's see. So you see age is still there. Now another method we'll be looking at is the for in method. Now the for in is a type of a traditional for loop statement in JavaScript used to loop through an object. So this for in statement is just dedicated in looping through objects. The traditional for statement is used to loop through arrays. For off is used to loop through iterables, but for in is used to loop through only objects. Remember, for off cannot be used to loop through objects, but for in now is dedicated only to objects. Now let's look at how we can use it. First, we write our for keyword, then our parentheses. Then inside here is now where we also write our statement. First, we set the variable. This variable is where each iteration in the object properties will be stored. Then we'll now write the in keyword followed by the object name we want to loop through. Then brace open, brace close. Inside it, we will now have this value inside here alive. So this value will contain each property. So now let's log it to see. Let's clear console. So you see the value now is the property name here. So we can now change it now for clarity purposes to property name. So now we can now get the value from the user using the bracket notation, because now we know that the property name is the property key here. So we'll now use it inside here to get the value. So we can now get now property value here. So now when we log it, so you see it logs both the property key and the value. Also, the for in only loops through the enumerable properties. If we make one a non-enumerable, it will not list it at all. Now let's make age. You know, we have been making age. Age have been suffering in our hands. Let's make the password non-enumerable. Let's make it false. So let's make sure okay, we didn't get the name right. Password. So we made the password key to be non-enumerable. So we expect for a not to list it. So we expect this not to be available in our next run. So now let's run it. So you see password is no longer available. Now also, the for in statement can also loop through the prototype object in an object and list all the properties inside there. So now to see it in action, let's define a prototype object in this object user. Now to do it in an object literal, we use the proto property. like this proto property. So now this proto property is an accessor property that points to and sets the prototype object in an object literal. Now, prototype is used in JavaScript for inheritance purposes. Prototype is the reason why we can call different methods and properties not directly defined in that object. We can call user dot to string in this object and it will return us a string representation of an object, but there was no to string defined in this object at all. This is because the toString is defined inside the prototype object in this object, and because this object inherits from another object from a class called object in JavaScript, and inside that object is where we have this toString defined. So this object, whenever created in JavaScript, inherits from this class object, and all the properties and methods defined inside this class are stored in the prototype object of any object created in JavaScript. So now this prototype object is not accessible, like we cannot see it when using this object, but it's always there. So that's why whenever we call this, JavaScript looks through the properties directly defined on the object. If it doesn't see it, it goes into the prototype object. Now that is where it will now see this object, because this user extends the object class, making this object the parent class and this user the child class. So it can now see this method defined in it. Though the actual implementation is defined inside this object class. So that's why it can able to call this. So the reason for this is just the prototype object which makes this possible. So this is called inheritance. Now to read more on this proto, I have a video lesson on it, understanding proto. You can go there and watch a full lesson I did on it. So I explained everything with examples. So now if we define properties here, like proto name, cn, or proto age 90. Now for-in can list these two. Now for-in can list all properties defined inside the prototype object. It can list it. Yeah. So this is the only method used to iterate over object that can loop through the properties in the prototype chain. Other methods that we looked at, for example, entries, keys, values, getOwnPropertyNames, cannot list properties defined in the prototype object of that object. So only the for-in can do it. So now if we save this and clear this and then run it, you see them. They are all listed. Yes. So but if we use Object.keys and Object.values and getOwnPropertyNames, we cannot be able to list through this thing. Also, now let's try it. Let's try with keys, for example, so as to see what I'm saying. Object.keys, and we now have user. Now let me remove this. Now keys, for each we just loop through it, get the key, then get the value, and say user, use the bracket notation key, then let's log it, key, and then the value, then let's clear this. So you see the prototype object properties are not listed, just only those defined directly on it. So these are all skipped. Yes, even the same thing with values too. Value. Now let's remove this. See, we will not see. Still the same thing. There is no cn and 90 there, the values of these prototype properties. So you see only the for-in can list the properties inside an can list prototype properties inside the prototype object in an object. So this is the end of our course lesson on iterating through objects.